of requests for copies of it.
Oh,
Perhaps you could compose one about the newfound joy we have in our members of Parliament.
I love coming on this show.
Schools are in the spotlight over students' rights. This is a regular occurrence, and this time it's Auckland's Mount Albert Grammar. A call for the school, supported by the PPTA, to adopt a gender-neutral, gender-equal jewellery policy. And this request began as a petition for boys to be allowed to wear the same jewellery as girls. It's a co-ed school. Female students are allowed to wear one plain stud on an earlobe, but male students are denied jewellery. Various other Auckland schools allow one ear stud and the wearing of a watch, and that's about it. But some do let the boys wear the ear studs. I suppose it's hard not to support gender-neutral, gender-equal jewellery in schools, but do you think there are other things to be concerned about as well? What did you think when you saw this?
I wonder if teachers are expending an awful lot of time and energy on these school uniform policies when they could be, teaching the kids. There seems to be endless rules about how long the socks can be and whether they can wear hoodies and, what jewellery. To me, it seems unnecessary, and maybe it's time we all grow up and let kids wear more or less what they wanted, as long as it's not offensive.
Sharp intake of breath.
I know, but what is the point of making them all look the same? What are we trying to achieve?
Are you also saying there's no point to school uniforms, really?
Yeah, I actually am. I'm saying let's just get rid of them.
Okay, Chris?
Oh, well, I went to Marlborough Boys College, where I went to eat my lunch and stay at a fight, which is a fine school now, but it probably wasn't so much then. I think let them, if they want to wear earrings, that's fine. There's some sense in not wearing dangly earrings, I suppose, because they can get ripped out. So I think that there's a semblance of rules, but then there's other rules for the sake of rules that you say you're here to be trained about what society is like, and therefore we're justified in creating rules, but that can only be taken so far. So I'm with Nikki.
But society doesn't make you wear, some people wear a uniform, but most people get to choose what they wear for work, and you have to learn to dress appropriately for what you do. That's part of going to work.
Be simpler with a uniform at work. You wouldn't have to think about it in the morning.
Oh, and that's an argument, I think, for uniforms at school as well, is that many people say it's simpler, and it breaks down the barriers of those people who haves and have-nots. But again, that's probably exactly what society's about.
Yeah. And actually, Steve Jobs and Barack Obama and people like that all believed in wearing the same thing, so they don't have to, they don't have to worry about their clothes before they go off to rule the world.
Can I ask you a philosophical question? I mean, when people say, it never did me any harm, about a variety of issues from the old days, are they also saying that humans need degrees of constraint? I mean, we often flourish under constraints. Sometimes we don't flourish so much when there aren't any at all. Is the right to wear jewellery at school that important?
I think it goes more importantly back to the thing that we always just are a product of our own upbringing and environment, and our points of reference, is particularly in a world as chaotic as it is now, is what it was when we grew up. But it's funny because most people wouldn't drive an 80s car, but they'd be happy with a 1980s basis of education for their kids. So,
Well said.
We'll both remember that one. Thank you. Dr. Chris Gallivan, always a pleasure.
Thank you, and thanks, Nikki.
Thank you.
And thank you for the poem. And Nikki, always a pleasure for you too, and good luck with the book.
I need it, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We're back tomorrow with the panel, and John Campbell is along shortly with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, coastal erosion and the coming crisis. Furious Matata residents tell Checkpoint the council gave them consent for renovations as recently as 18 months ago, while knowing properties would need to be abandoned due to a serious loss of life risk in a heavy flood. We've just got off the phone to Whakatane Mayor Tony Bond. He tells us the council doesn't have enough money to compensate residents and the government must help. He also says he wouldn't live there. Down the coast, angry Homoana Beach residents question what the council is doing after 2 metres of their coast has washed away in the past week. This is a big issue and we're looking at it at length tonight. We were also there when the America's Cup arrived at the airport.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Senior doctors say some intellectually disabled children and adults are at imminent risk of harm because secure care units are critically under-resourced. The doctors have written to the Health Ministry saying resourcing in the sector is inadequate and demanding an independent review. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
RNZ News has obtained a copy of a letter from the Human Rights Commissioner and the Children's Commissioner to the Ministry last month. In it, David Rutherford and Andrew Beecroft back psychiatrists' worries about critical under-resourcing in intellectual disability secure care. They say top psychiatrists Jeremy Skipworth and Nigel Fairley have told the Ministry a lack of funding to ensure adequate capacity presents a serious and, in some areas, imminent risk of harm to those individuals who are unable to get appropriate care. Mr Rutherford and Judge Beecroft agree, saying a review of intellectual disability is needed. Ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Family members and friends of the victorious Team New Zealand crew were on hand to welcome them home at Auckland Airport earlier today. Several hundred supporters, many of them waving flags and signs, cheered as the team came through the arrivals gate with the America's Cup. Leonie Hornell's brother Chris and his family have been based in Bermuda since the end of January. She says they were looking forward to having them all home to celebrate the victory.
Can't wait. Still pinching ourselves that it's happened, and I think once they're home it'll sink in for them as well when they see all this.
Leonie Hornell, sister of crew member Chris. The number of foreign trusts has plummeted by 3/4 following the introduction of tougher rules at the beginning of the month. Inland Revenue says it's received applications to register fewer than 3,000 trusts, while another 3,000 have told the Tax Department they didn't want to be part of the new regime. Brent Edwards has more.
Of the roughly 11,750 trusts registered at the end of last year, Inland Revenue says nearly 6,000 are unaccounted for. Tax experts say it's likely the unaccounted trusts have been wound up or shifted to another jurisdiction. Last year's revelations in the Panama Papers, showing foreigners used New Zealand to hide their wealth, forced the government to introduce the tougher trust rules, after earlier saying there was no problem. This is Brent Edwards.
The minister responsible for drug reform will give his initial support to a members' bill legalising medicinal cannabis. Just last month, Peter Dunn criticised the bill by Green MP Julianne Genter, saying the bill was unworkable. The bill would make it legal for people suffering from a terminal illness or debilitating condition to use cannabis or cannabis products with the support of a GP. Mr Dunn told journalists the bill still needs work, but after talking to Ms Genter, he will vote in support of the bill in the first reading. He says some issues that remain include the scope of the bill and how it will work practically. The United States has confirmed that North Korea has tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. The US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has called it a new escalation of the threat to the US and the world. The BBC's James Landale explains.
The key point is that it might now have the power to reach potentially more than 3,400 miles, the minimum defined range for an intercontinental ballistic missile. And if so, that could mean reaching as far as Alaska on the mainland of the United States. Experts said it was still not clear if North Korea had the technology needed to protect a warhead on re-entry and guide it to its target. But the possibility of North Korean missiles reaching the US is a significant step forward that President Trump said earlier this year just wouldn't happen.
James Landale reporting. North Korea's official news agency has quoted Kim Jong-un taunting the US, saying the test was a gift to the Americans on their Independence Day. Firefighters say a gas leak around an oven was the cause of an explosion that ripped an Auckland property apart. The roof and walls of the home in the suburb of New Windsor collapsed in the blast yesterday and 2 people were injured. A fire risk management officer, Jason Goffin, says the LPG gas leaked when a light switch was turned on. Mr Goffin says it's important people regularly check their gas bottles are safe and turned off when not in use. The Transport Agency is warning Otago and Southland motorists to be careful, saying tonight will be the coldest night in the area so far this year. A spokesperson, John Jarvis, says temperatures of less than -7 degrees are expected in the lower South Island tonight, and drivers should expect ice. He says the icy conditions are expected to continue into the morning, and motorists should delay travel and start work later tomorrow if possible. Anyone driving in alpine areas need to carry chains. It's 5:05. Back in the country with the old mug after winning the America's Cup, Peter Burling and Blair Tuke are already discussing just whether they're up for defending their Olympic 49er title in Tokyo in 2020. Team New Zealand arrived home from Bermuda this afternoon and will take part in a victory parade in Auckland tomorrow. Burling and Tuke won gold at the Rio Olympics last year, but say trying to compare that victory to America's Cup success is nigh on impossible. Tuke says they need to collect their thoughts over the next few days.
We've had a bit of a chat about it, and we're ready to pull the trigger if we need to. We've got all our gear that we used last time, but there's, we can't underestimate how much work has to go into an Olympic campaign. There's people that have been sailing straight since the last Olympics last year, and so if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly, because what we did in Rio was pretty awesome, and we don't want to sort of go into a half cock next time.
Blair Tuke. Britain's Mark Cavendish has been forced out of the Tour de France with a broken shoulder blade after crashing heavily following a clash with world champion Peter Sagan in today's fourth stage. Cavendish, who's won 30 Tour de France stages, was elbowed off balance by Sagan near the finish of the 207-kilometre stage that took them from Luxembourg into France. Sagan was subsequently disqualified and ejected from the race, but has appealed the decision. Britain's Geraint Thomas retains the overall lead, with defending champion Chris Froome still second. And Manchester United captain Wayne Rooney is reportedly set to return to English Premier League club Everton after being left out of the squad for United's trip to the United States. And that's the news.
Tonight on Night, Stavros Kyriakidis talks about the sculptures he's been making along Wellington's coastline, made from stuff washed up on the rocks. Sometimes even the rocks themselves. Linda Changwai Earl flies solo with Constable Henare Jones, bringing up the kids on his own when he's not on the beat. And we'll have another crack getting in touch with our man in Uganda, Tabu Butagira. It'll be all right in the night, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to occasional rain in the morning, with some heavy and possibly thundery falls for Northland, Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula. Taranaki and the Central High Country in Gisborne fine, with scattered rain developing tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti, also Hawke's Bay, mainly fine with frosts tomorrow morning and some spots of rain tomorrow night. Wairarapa and Wellington fine, apart from isolated coastal showers tonight and tomorrow. Showers spreading to the remainder of the Wairarapa later tomorrow. Marlborough to Otago, fine with morning frosts, possibly severe in sheltered places. However, isolated coastal showers mainly about Banks Peninsula, spreading further inland later tomorrow. And the remainder of the South Island fine with morning frosts or fog. For the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms easing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Coming up on the program tonight, the America's Cup arrives in NZ and the latest on North Korea and its missiles and the tension in the Persian Gulf. But we begin tonight with the coast, with erosion and with flooding. Tonight we go to two communities that are being lost to water. In a moment, a strip of Hawke's Bay where 2 metres of coastline and road have been lost in the past week. And we're going to ask, can district and regional councils, sometimes with small ratepayer numbers, cope with this? And if not, is it time for greater direction from the government? We start in Matata, just up the coast from Whakatane in the Bay of Plenty. Last night, Checkpoint broke the story of the properties there that people are being asked to leave. 12 years after those properties were first officially described as being at risk of loss of life from the debris caused by flooding. This is an example of what can go wrong and how, if it's not addressed quickly and explicitly, it can go more wrong. Because the risk identified in 2005 didn't stop people rebuilding there and didn't stop people moving there. Zach Fleming with what's gone very wrong.
Wayne Irwin says when he bought his home in Matata in 2009, he was told it was in a low-risk area, and regardless, the plan from council was to mitigate the risk of another debris flow happening. An August 2008 copy of the Whakatane District Council's Byways publication proudly promoted the approval of a $2.4 million net barrier, which it said would protect Matata, but it was never built.
And we have gone ahead with a lot of renovation work on the place, and because my wife and I have decided this is where we'd sort of settle down and retire to. And we have poured a few dollars into the joint now. We're now being told that if we don't take the voluntary retreat plan that they're offering, they're going to take it to a higher level and have us where they could have us forced off our land with no compensation. The valuation of the house that I've ended up with is less than what I've paid for it, and that's not including the reno work I've done on the joint.
And that was when you bought it 8 years ago, so they've offered you less than what it was worth 8 years ago?
Yes.
On May the 1st, 2005, his home was valued by council at $320,000. Wayne's been offered a buyout of $280,000. And he says that's unfair because, to summarise, he bought a low-risk property and council said it was going to mitigate that already low risk. It's not Wayne's fault that mitigation can't actually happen, but he's now looking at losing money and his home.
We formed a small group here as an action group we have get together and just discuss going forward what we're going to do, what we're all going to do, and we're with the rest of the group. We're planning to stay and challenge them. We sold up in Australia to move over here and sort of retire out and just take things easy by the beach, and it's all just gone to custard.
And it seems, on the surface at least, to be all about money. A 14-page 2015 progress report to the Whakatane District Council's Policy Committee focuses heavily on the cost of buyouts. The need for funding assistance from other government agencies is apparent, it says, and continues, quote, the council's legal advice is that it has no obligation to compensate landowners for loss of property values. So residents only rebuilt on the council's promise of mitigation, but because council has no legal obligation, it's essentially telling them to suck it up.
So we're talking about a two-storied home, that's basically 260 squares, total beachfront. We've spent a huge amount of money re-roofing, repainting, redecorating. You couldn't build the top of this house for $280,000. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous.
$280,000 is what the council valued Grant Wilkins' home at, the same as Wayne's. It's insured for nearly $600,000.
How do they think they can just come and make ridiculous offers and expect you to pack your bags, walk away happy? It's not going to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, they gave assurances way back that they would control the issues up in the catchment and go ahead and build your homes and live happily ever after. I mean, they haven't done that. And that's a fact.
And now they're asking you to cop the decrease in your property costs.
Oh, yeah, mate. I mean, well, what annoys me, mate, is for whatever reason, Whakatane Council seems to be under pressure. There's no accountability. Well, I'm sorry, there is. I mean, there's elderly people here, like Rick's father and that, and it would sort of been the best years of their life. Mac used to have the place I'm in, an old family friend of ours. I mean, the last few years of his life was absolute torment. I mean, these are people in their 70s, and now Rick's mother's going through the same thing. His father passed away last year. I mean, he sort of spent the last 10 years of his life happily fishing on the beach and enjoying it, but he wasn't. And this is all down to our local council.
So, Zach Fleming with that report. There are two obvious issues here, and we spoke to the Whakatane Mayor Tony Bon about them. We're going to discuss whether this is simply too big for a small district council like his to deal with. But first, have Matata residents been let down?
Yeah, John, I will have to agree with you that people have been frustrated. Since 2005, when the debris flow came through, I joined council back in 2007, I think it was, as a new councillor again, and we were discussing the debris flow dam. We wanted to actually mitigate it. So we were under the belief that we could actually fix the problem. And then in 2010, expert engineers came along and said, you need your head read because there's no way you're going to be able to build anything. And if you build something, it's going to be cost way more than the whole of the Whakatane district or even the Bay of Plenty could afford.
In the meantime, people have stayed there, people have bought there, people have rebuilt there after 2005. They have done so in good faith because they were told there would be mitigation. They have told that an area that GNS, Tonkin and Taylor, council papers have identified as unsafe could be made safe. And now what for those people?
Now what? Our council has struggled with this over a number of years. And I've been one of them. I've actually been on the side saying, well, if people want to stay there with the risk, they should. But when you get told, and we know that if the council doesn't take action and actually mitigate, or mitigate is help in getting people out of there, we will be responsible. And there is history, there will be another debris flow. This time it could take lives. And if it takes lives, I know damn well whose neck will be on the block. It'll be the current mayor of the district.
18 months ago, the council gave resource consent to a couple in Clem Elliott Drive, which is one of the roads identified in the Tonkin Taylor report as being at serious risk in a major flood event, to install a 50k lift in their property. You haven't been on top of this. You knew by then that the mitigation was not going to happen. You had report after report by then saying this area was not safe. And even as recently as 2016, 15-16, you were allowing people to spend money on their properties that you are now requiring them to leave.
No new properties have been built. No new extensions have been built. Yes, I was unaware of somebody putting a lift in, but we have had one resident that wanted to build, and he was determined to build. He came to council. Council sent that off to Wellington to get a determination from the building authority, and it's been turned down that we're not allowed to release any building consents for new buildings in that area because it's too risky. And with all this climate change, John, that's coming in around the country, this is not going to be the first and only one. We're going to have some other areas in New Zealand that are going to be identified as too risky.
Absolutely. This is going to become increasingly common. And in fact, tonight on Checkpoint, we are reporting about another example not far away from you, down the coast in Hawke's Bay. But I want to talk about your district council. And I want to ask you, and I'd like as straight an answer as you are possibly able to give me, do you have enough money to deal with this? And if a similar situation arises in and or around Edgecombe, do you have enough money to deal with this? And is the government doing enough to support you? Can small district councils like you cope with what you have just described as a growing crisis?
John, I will give you a straight answer. I've always given straight answers. No, we do not have enough money to do it ourselves. We have made it quite clear that we need a partnership deal with central government and the regional council. We're saying we are good for a partnership deal. We have talks with central government. We've had some talks with regional council, but some of those other bodies are a little way away, and I think we'll see this develop as the change in the plan comes through.
Where are you at with government? Have you gone to government and said, we need some help?
Yes, we have.
And what response have you had?
Initially, we had, no, we're not interested. And then secondly, that, then our local MP, the Honourable Ann Tolley, has got round the table and has put officials to listen to the idea. There is no promise from anybody, but there is cooperation that we have to do something.
Okay, and where are you at with that process?
It is slowly going forward. And yes, the residents, I feel for you. We're trying to move it forward to get some decision. And the new group that's been formed that want to make sure they want to stay. I can understand some people want to stay.
Would you live there?
Not now. And I would say a couple of years ago, I would have said, yes, I would.
Does the government have to be more proactive about dealing with councils who find themselves in the situation you are in?
I think government needs to partner up more with local government because this climate change issue is huge. I've just come out of a meeting to do this interview and, ironically, the subject was climate change.
Tony Bond, Whakatane District Mayor. So what does the Climate Change Minister say in response to that? Her name is Paula Bennett, and her office told us a short time ago she is unavailable to comment. We're on the east coast here, Whakatane. Let's go down the coast to Hawke's Bay, where coastal erosion is forcing another community to think about their future after waves threatened seafront homes along Homewana Beach yesterday. 2 metres of coastline has washed away in a week, and residents say the Hawke's Bay District and regional councils have failed to provide protection. Again, this is the same issue, protection and warnings. Residents say if something isn't done soon, their properties will not only be washed away, but access to Cape Kidnap as one of the Hawke's Bay's biggest regional assets will be under threat. This time Bridget Burke is the reporter.
Photographer Tim Whitaker capturing a powerful easterly swell over Homewana Beach yesterday. His drone footage shows the impact of a storm off the east coast, sending waves over the balconies and licking the windows of seaside homes along Clifton Road.
John and I were sitting here yesterday and the waves were crashing over, and suddenly we just heard bang on the roof and all these stones rattling on the roof and hitting the window.
It's pretty scary when you wake up in the night and somebody's throwing shingle at your front window and it's the ocean.
The situation here isn't new. Clifton Road residents like Mark Lawrence have long held fears about coastal erosion and its impact on their waterfront homes. He built a sea wall to protect his property in 2008 without resource consent, but he's been locked in a battle with the Hastings District Council ever since, after it demanded he remove the wall or face a $200,000 fine.
We had to get a notified consent to keep it, and I'm telling you, to rip it out, we'd have to get a consent under the RMA to pull it out. So where do we stand? One guy said, you should be suing the council for this.
Homewana resident Keith Newman is a member of the Clifton Tongoio Coastal Hazards Group. He says it's a critical time for the Clifton coast, which acts as a gateway to Cape kidnappers.
I think you've got to be pragmatic. You've got to step back and say, well, we get hit occasionally like this. You've got to weather it out, and when it dies down, you see a little bit more erosion. And to me, that's got to be incentive for the local councils to say, do we value this area or are we going to let it erode? And I think one of the big issues is the country's watching what's happening in Homewana and Tiawanga and Clifton. Clifton's just lost probably 2 metres more, and that's been going on for a long time. They have a plan there to build a protective wall. That's going through the council at the moment. So, yay, something's happening. But at the most vulnerable area where you get access to Homewana and Tiawanga, we call it the Cape View Corner, there's power, water, road access, all of that's vulnerable and not being looked at a time when we're growing the number of subdivisions out here, we're planning coastal reserves. It seems ridiculous that we haven't got action to protect what we already have.
He says over the past week alone, 2 metres of coastline has been lost to the sea.
There was a section of the road dropped into the sea last week and just yesterday. Big waves there. There are plans for development there, but while it's vulnerable, that area is at risk. The marine platform where the boat club is and the access to the gannets. I mean, this is an important area to Hawke's Bay.
But any action will be too late for Mark Lawrence. He and his family have had enough, and he's angry.
If they want these people out of these coastal zones, which they allowed to be built on in the first place, and then it allowed the beach to disappear in front of our eyes, compensate us adequately. Not at the market rate that's been eroded to the state it's in now, but of a higher value. Why should we have to settle for less when this demise is not our doing? They haven't even got a game plan for managed retreat. They haven't even got one. If you ask any council how they're going to go about it, the detail, the mechanics, they've got no idea. They cannot tell you. It's just a farce. Compensate us and make that coastal zone basically no man's land. No one can live there. That's the way it'll be.
Keith Newman says the Cape Coast is one of the Hawke's Bay's biggest regional assets and must be looked after. He believes the council has unfairly tried to pass on the cost to individual property owners like Mark.
in the past, councils have tried to put the responsibility for protecting the community back on the beachfront owners, and each time they've done that, it's been at an impossible cost to those beachfront and near beachfront owners, and we just cannot go back there again. This has to be seen as the Clifton protection is as a wider ratepayer area that we all contribute to. We all contribute to the libraries and the Opera House and all the rest of it. Your beach access and your access to recreational and ecological facilities out here is a regional concern. No council should be putting the full cost back onto local citizens.
He adds, as the erosion worsens, the council has continued to issue building consents in the area.
The power is very close to the coast, the water is very close to the coast, and if that particular piece of roading that I'm talking about is compromised, then all of Tiawonga loses power and all of Clifton, and this is an important issue. And like I say, we have about 120 new homes about to be built out here. So it seems to me if you don't get the infrastructure right, then we shouldn't be encouraging people to build new homes.
Shirley and John Bridgman have called Homoana Beach home for 60 years. The couple owns 6 properties along the coastline, and when we called this afternoon, the tide was coming in.
It can be a bit scary because you see it building, like there's one building right now, and you think, oh God, how big is that going to be? Oh, that's a big one. And I think we're about an hour off high tide, and the waves are coming over the fence now.
Keith Newman hopes new councillors will address the inaction of past councils urgently.
We just hope that we don't get hammered by another high seas or king tide again, and then it's too late. I think this is a critical time for the Cape Coast, and with this coastal erosion group, the rest of the country is looking to this area as an example of what might be done.
Mr Newman says officials will hold a closed meeting this week to discuss a strategy for the long-term management of the coast. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Peter Bevan is on the Regional Council and he's the chair of Hawke's Bay's Coastal Hazards Joint Committee. I spoke to him just before we came on air and asked him if the residents of Clifton Road can afford to stay there.
Well, it's up to the local communities to actually decide what the strategy has to be. This is not the first time those houses have been hit with waves. It probably happens every 2 or 3 years. So there are risks living there. There are long-term risks, of course, and eventually they may have to move, but it's up to the community appetite for risk as to determine what the strategy is for those people, how they defend themselves, whether they have to move. And you have to bear in mind that the national policy statement on the coast requires us to develop a 100-year strategy.
OK, if they have to move, what form of compensation do they receive?
Well, that's entirely up to the councils and them to discuss and decide. And we've got no guidance from the government on what that might look like. We don't even know whether the government will participate in this. And I can sort of understand why the government is reticent to get involved, because when you look around New Zealand and you see the number of coastal communities that might be at risk in the future with sea level rise, it's a big problem for us as a country.
It's a really big problem, and this represents the universal and the particular, doesn't it, this community? So is it time the government started being proactive and initiating conversations with organisations like yours, communities like Homoana, where people may have to leave and will not be able to sell their properties?
Well, I'd certainly like to see the government take a much more proactive role than they have so far. They have funded some research into this area, but they certainly haven't, at this point in time, made any commitment to do more than that. And it's a hole that the local councils, the local authorities are having to fill. And it's a difficult one because without national guidance, we'll all go and do different things. And there needs to be a commonality as to how we approach these issues.
Right, so you want some leadership from the government here?
Oh, absolutely. I think we need it.
And do you need money from the government?
That's got to be part of the conversation.
Okay, what work has the council been doing in the meantime, separate from what the government may or may not do, to mitigate erosion along that coastline?
All right, so what we're currently involved in here is all three councils, Hastings, Napier and the regional council, working together as a joint committee, and we've formed the Hawke's Bay into two cells, from the Napier Port North and from Napier Port South. And we've drawn people from all of the communities along those coastlines to form a panel who are currently considering what the options are and what their preferences are. And that work will be finished and recommendations made to the councils before the end of this year. So we've actually been quite proactive, I think.
There are parts of that coastline where 2 metres of road has been lost in roughly a week. Are you worried about this? Can you afford to deal with this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And in fact, in my lifetime, that road has been reformed a couple of times, and it's actually been moved back probably 40 or 50 metres.
So does it have to go back again?
Well, it certainly will have to be moved back again because it's undercut quite badly. The problem is that there is a camping ground there and there's a boat ramp, and people want to preserve those things. You know, the first instinct of any person or community along the coastline is to preserve what they've got. They want to defend it.
Absolutely. And Peter, I was just talking to you 2 minutes ago about the fact that compensation will be required. Surely, if people are going to have to walk away from the land because the sea is eating the coast, and you have no money and you have no direction from the government.
Oh, and that's quite simply our problem. When you compare us with a country like Holland, for instance, that's got about 250 or 300 kilometres of coast and 20 million people to fund their defence, the solutions in New Zealand aren't going to look like the solutions in Holland. So we have to be realistic about what we can afford, but we also have to take into account what the local communities want and what their appetite for risk is. So,
and also, do you have to be more hard-nosed about people who are looking, for example, to put subdivisions along the coast, build close to the coast? Do you have to be much more proactive in explicitly identifying risks?
Oh, absolutely. That's got to be a function of council for future housing developments. They have to take a precautionary approach, I guess, because they'll only run into problems further down the track. So absolutely, yes, councils have got to be mindful of the uncertainties of sea level rise, because at the moment we're working on a sea level rise of anything up to 1.5 metres in the next 100 years. But some scientists are saying that that's an underestimate. It might be 3 metres, and that changes the game. So whatever strategy we develop, it has to be an adaptive one, so that if there are trigger events that happen sooner than we think or that we're currently anticipating, then the people are ready for it.
With Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. 27 minutes to 6. Coming up on the program, the America's Cup returns to New Zealand after 14 years away. We were at the airport as it arrived. North Korea conducts its first successful test of a long-range missile that it says can reach the US mainland. What is going on in the Persian Gulf? Nona has business news and much more coming up. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us. You can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and you can send a letter, old school styles, if you'd like. But before you do any of that, do listen to Anna Thomas reading the headlines.
Thanks, John. A lack of funding in the health sector is putting intellectually disabled people at imminent risk of harm. Top psychiatrists have written to the Health Ministry demanding an independent review. They're backed by the Human Rights and Children's Commissioners, who have also written of their worries about critical under-resourcing in the sector. Several hundred fans, friends and family members turned out to welcome home the victorious Team New Zealand and the Old Mug. An excited crowd waved flags and signs and cheered as the team came through the arrivals gate with the America's Cup. One fan said she thinks the victory won't sink in fully until the team members settle back. Tightened rules have cut the number of foreign trusts by 3/4. The new rules were introduced at the beginning of the month. Of around 12,000 trusts registered at the end of last year, Inland Revenue says it's received applications to register fewer than 3,000 trusts, while another 3,000 have told IRD they did not want to be part of the new regime. The minister responsible for drug reform will give his initial support to a members' bill legalising medicinal cannabis. Just last month, Peter Dunn criticised the bill by Green MP Julianne Genter, saying the bill was unworkable. He says he's talked to Ms Genter and some issues that remain, including the scope of the bill and how it will work practically. The US has confirmed that North Korea has tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has called it a new escalation of the threat to the US and the world. North Korea's official news agency has quoted Kim Jong-un taunting the US, saying the test was a gift to the Americans on their Independence Day. Firefighters say a gas leak around an oven caused an explosion that ripped an Auckland property apart. 2 people were injured when the roof and walls of the home collapsed in the blast yesterday. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Appreciate it. Let's go to Nona on my other side here in the Auckland studio. A more cautious investment environment is prompting listed technology companies to cut costs to meet growth targets. Nona Peltier.
That's right.
What's been happening?
Well, we've been hearing about this for a while. There's a lot of tech companies that listed on the market over the last 4 years, say about 10 of them actually, as a matter of fact. And most of them are struggling. They've been losing money while they try and fund their expansion, with an absence of investment and support for those plans, mostly because investors, they like tech companies, they are excited about them, but then the reality hits home. These companies are not making the revenue that they'd hoped, and it's costing more to grow their businesses overseas. It's not cheap.
And of course, by the time you find out this was the success story, the share price has bolted, right?
Pretty much.
Okay,
so in the end, investors, despite that, they're very excited about tech companies and the idea that they're going to make a lot, the Apples and all those kinds of companies, in Facebook, it's so exciting. But really, in reality, it costs a lot of money and they're not willing to foot the bill. So these companies, a number of them, have decided to shed staff, lower their budgets in research and development and even administration costs as a way of trying to bring back those costs and try to live within their means, within the revenue that they are able to generate without counting on investors putting up more cash. So yeah, it's been pretty tough.
This is tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it is tough.
And people want to invest in risk-taking, R&D, new ideas, and you need staff to do those things,
And
right?
so things have changed. So the market has changed. We're seeing fewer companies coming to market, smaller companies. They're waiting longer. They're getting larger before they decide to list. And, we will see some companies listing. I've talked to Brooke Bone with Milford Asset Management. He's an investment director there. He said he knows of a number of, good tech companies that are taking their time, growing, so that they get to a size that when they do list on the market, they're not going to disappoint investors. So it remains to be seen. But we'll have to watch that. But certainly it's not an easy ride, no.
Thanks, Nona. Tell us about the markets today.
Okay, well, look, the situation with North Korea has been upsetting markets everywhere, except the U.S. market, of course. Independence Day, they've been closed, so they're going to be opening later in the day, and we'll find out what happens then. But for the moment, the market is somewhat subdued in Asia, and our top 50 index, it fell 1/3%, down 25 points to 7,596, and our dollar was steady, 72.8 US cents, 95.6 Australian, and 56.3 British pence.
Business reporter Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed, and we will have more on that situation with North Korea coming up. The America's Cup arrived home today, a small conceit to use that phrase, in its 166-year history. It's spent just 8 years here before. The holders are hoping to keep it here, though, perhaps not for as long as the New York Yacht Club's unbroken streak, 1857 until 1983. But for long enough to make a real impact. It's estimated hosting a defence will inject somewhere in the region of $500 million into the economy. This is big money, and Emirates Team New Zealand has big stars. So will foreign syndicates come after them? As you're about to hear, Grant Dalton's already had to warn one predatory syndicate off. The government's injected holding money, $5 million, but will New Zealand be able to retain the team that arrived home in Auckland this morning?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome home the holders of the America's Cup. Here it is, Emirates Team New Zealand!
They arrived home, as you can hear, to rapturous applause. Grant Dalton, Peter Burling, Glenn Ashby leading the team in. The cup itself carried triumphantly between them. 22 years since the America's Cup last entered the country through these doors, from Black Magic's victory in San Diego in '95. Russell Coutts was skipper and helmsman then. He defended it twice, then won it again as CEO for Oracle. So which of the class of 2017 will be similarly sought by foreign syndicates keen to use New Zealanders to take the cup back off New Zealand? I asked Grant Dalton, does he know?
I think there's a message really to teams that try to do that to us, because we're always the team that gets stripped, because we're the easy one in that respect. We don't have the money. Is that I'll view that very, very badly if you are trying to challenge and you are trying to strip us at the same time.
So that is a very clear message right now, definitive.
Absolutely, and I've made that to one team already.
Can you tell us what team that is?
No, I'm not going to say who it is, but I think that...
It wasn't the Defender, was it?
No, it wasn't the Defender. It wasn't the Defender. But, we want to hold our guys. But, one of the things we've done so well, I think, this time, is we reinvented ourselves. And we've got to reinvent ourselves. If that's the same people in similar roles, then that's fine. But we still have to reinvent ourselves.
Those fights may or may not be yet to come. Today, the Cup New Zealand lost in 2003 was back. And with it, a sense of what will follow. Other syndicates, other teams moving in, building bases, spending huge sums of money here in NZ.
We've got amazing interest already. I mean, my email's going nuts with people that, you're always going to get the email of the person that really couldn't make it, but when you got an email from someone who can. So it just brings a huge amount of business in. And if they come for a reasonable period of time, certainly it will promote the industry. There's many industries or sets of the industry that grew out of the last one. Protector is a good one, because we still deal with them, and I hope that it helps our boat building industry to be able to build for these syndicates.
I know I'm asking you to crystal ball gaze, and I know you've just brought the America's Cup back to New Zealand, its first trip in through the airport since 1995, and this is important stuff. But looking forward, do you think there will be more teams in Auckland to challenge for it than there were in Bermuda?
Well, I mean, certainly we'd like that. It is crystal ball gazing to suggest there will be a lot. But if you go back to the days of Team New Zealand as it was then, there was 12 teams here. Whether the world economy will allow 12 teams, I'm not sure. But I think we'd certainly target for more than we're in Bermuda.
But Blair Tuke and Peter Burling, two of the finest sailors of their generation, Olympic gold medalists, America's Cup winners, both still only in their mid-20s. What next for them, now superstars of the sport? Blair Tuke. Will you expect syndicates to come knocking on your door? Will you expect some of the wealthy syndicates from the north to say, actually, we want this guy in our team?
Yeah, maybe, but that's all ahead of us. For now, we're just going to enjoy this and soak it up and very much, enjoy it with our friends and family, with the rest of the teammates in our country.
And feel proud of what you've done?
Yeah, very proud. It's a pretty amazing achievement, I think.
Peter Burling. The phone is going to start ringing, is it? It probably has been already.
Yeah, for sure, and it's something like I said before. We're just super proud to be able to bring this trophy back and share it with everyone in this country. And we'll make sure we have a couple of weeks off before we make any big decisions. But I'm a really proud Kiwi. Love racing for New Zealand and love sailing for New Zealand, and it's something that that's what I aim to do. Grant
Dalton is 60, older than Tuke and Burling combined. He's seen it all, the lows, the highs, the battles behind the scenes, and now, until it's time to start the business of defending it, he just wants a day or two to take it all in.
Well, as we were walking through the airport before we came out, I was saying to Glenn Ashby, even if we successfully defend it, we'll never do this again, so we need to enjoy this moment. And it's a big thing, yes, it certainly is.
Grant Dalton at the airport. Bradley White was the cameraman. About lunchtime today, they came through to lots of family members who haven't seen them in some cases for months. It's coming up to 5:45. The United States has vowed to defend itself and its allies after North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile that experts say is capable of reaching the US mainland. The United Nations Security Council will meet in an urgent session tomorrow to discuss yesterday's launch, described by North Korea as its first successful test of a long-range missile. Experts believe it does now have the range to reach parts of the US mainland like Alaska. The American Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says it represents a new escalation of the security threat posed by North Korea. US and South Korean troops have already fired missiles into the waters off South Korea in a direct response. The BBC's James Landale has this report.
This is the moment that North Korea says it became a major power. The launch of a missile that it claims can reach across continents and deliver a nuclear weapon as far away as the United States. The news was announced on state television with barely constrained joy. The presenter showing the handwritten order given by the country's leader Kim Jong-un. He personally supervised the launch of a missile that he believes will secure him in power, protect his people and dismay his opponents to the south.
If North Korea ignores our military's warning and continues provocations, we clearly warn that Kim Jong-un's regime will face destruction.
Described as a Hwasong-14, it was launched from an airfield in the west of the country. It was sent up at a very steep angle and it rose, it's claimed, to an altitude of about 1,700 miles. That's thought to be the highest any North Korean missile has got to. It then landed 37 minutes later, more than 500 miles away, somewhere in the sea close to Japan. The key point is that if this missile were fired at a shallower angle, it might now have the power to reach potentially more than 3,400 miles, the minimum defined range for an intercontinental ballistic missile. And if so, that could mean reaching as far as Alaska on the mainland of the United States. Experts said it was still not clear if North Korea had the technology needed to protect a warhead on re-entry and guide it to its target. But the possibility of North Korean missiles reaching the US is a significant step forward that President Trump said earlier this year just wouldn't happen. In a tweet, he again urged China to put pressure on North Korea to end this nonsense once and for all, a message echoed by allies.
The government will be escalating this at the G20, but the real pressure has got to come from China.
But so far, China has been reluctant or unable to turn the screw on North Korea. President Xi of China was in Russia today. Both he and President Putin called for a freeze on North Korea's nuclear weapons program, but also the suspension of US and South Korean military exercises. The balance of power is shifting in the region, and the outside world seems powerless to stop it.
The other region gripped by a balance of power shift, or maybe not, is the Persian Gulf, and we will go there later in the program. The minister responsible for drug reform will give his initial support to a members' bill legalising medicinal cannabis. Now, just last month, Peter Dunn criticised Green MP Julianne Genter's bill, saying it was unworkable. Now, well, here's our political reporter, Mehiran.
Peter Dunn is sometimes coy about which way he votes, but today he was put on the spot at a drug symposium when a political panel was asked to put their hands up if they supported the medicinal cannabis bill. In June, the Associate Health Minister told TV3's The Nation he had major reservations about the bill, saying it was unworkable and changed the whole ballgame in an unintended way. But today Mr Dunn said he'd been talking to Julianne Genter and he will vote in support of the bill at its first reading.
There are a lot of things in the bill that would need to be changed before it could proceed further, but I think it's a useful discussion to have and to see where the Select Committee gets to.
The members' bill would make it legal for people suffering from a terminal illness or debilitating condition to use cannabis or cannabis products with the support of a GP. It also allows doctors to permit qualifying patients to grow and possess cannabis. At the drug symposium in Parliament, MPs from the ACT, Green, Māori and Labour parties said they would all support the bill. But National MP Chris Bishop says his party hasn't made its mind up yet.
It's one of those issues where we do want to have a good discussion about it as a caucus. We may decide to have it as a conscience vote where MPs can vote individually. We may also decide to have it as a party vote where the National Party takes a party position. So we haven't had that process-based discussion, and we also haven't had the substantive discussion.
The Greens co-leader Matata Petera wants the legalisation to go further than medicinal cannabis.
New Zealanders, adults, should be free to grow their pot, to consume their pot,
and to share it with their friends. It is effectively making legal now what people do now every day.
The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says the policing of drugs is inconsistent.
I could not get a police officer to come to the school where I found out one young man was selling drugs at the school. They didn't even want to talk to him. It's like, what do you got to do?
And Marama Fox says this inconsistency often hurts Māori and Pacific communities, as shown by their high representation in prison.
The system is inherently racist, and every time you say that, people get very upset with those words, but it is, and we have to address it. And so I don't think the law perpetuates it per se. It's the implementation and the policing and the general attitude in our nation.
Peter Dunn says the key to drug law changes is making sure the public is on board.
There's a general recognition that we've made progress, we've got a long way to go, and I think the question is not so much the radical nature of change, but just how you actually move forward and take people with you, and you don't end up creating a backlash for moves that on the face of it might make sense, and then suddenly when they happen, people say, oh my God, what was all that about?
And there was one thing that everyone on the panel agreed on: the current prohibition of drugs isn't working and some kind of law reform is needed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
The White House has confirmed that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump will hold fully fledged bilateral talks later this week at the G20 summit in Germany, rather than just holding talks on the sideline. All things considered, those talks could be a little bit awkward and certainly heavily scrutinised. Here's CNN's Michelle Kosinski.
President Trump will meet Vladimir Putin face-to-face on Friday while they're in Germany for the G20 summit. It could have been a simple pull-aside meeting, a short chat, but the Russians have been wanting more. And now Trump agrees. It's time. The last time the U.S. met this way with Putin was 2 years ago. And the last time Obama spoke to Putin in person was a blunt warning that he'd better stop meddling in U.S. politics. Trump has had plenty to say about the Russian president.
If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader. If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability. I hope we have a fantastic relationship.
But the relationship has been anything but fantastic. Sanctions on Russia have not loosened, nor has its hold on Crimea. Trump bombed a Syrian airfield after President Assad's forces, still supported by Russia, attacked citizens with sarin gas. Now both Trump and Putin are looking for some common ground, at least in fighting ISIS.
There's a lot to talk about, and Russia is an adversary of the United States, and they should talk about Ukraine. They should talk about Syria. The president should find the opportunity to speak about NATO. He should speak about the activity of Russia meddling in the United States election as well as other elections abroad.
For now, though, the White House says there is no specific agenda, which worries some, even within Trump's own national security team, over his potential for distraction and distaste for extensive preparation. Concerns that Putin will steer the ship, that Trump may not even broach the subject of Russia's cyber attacks on American democracy.
The United States needs to arrive in Hamburg and send a clear message that it will not tolerate direct attacks on U.S. soil against the United States, and also send a message that the United States stands with its allies. It's really important for U.S. credibility that President Trump makes all of those things clear.
At Trump's request, the White House has been preparing options of things to offer Russia in exchange for cooperation or a change in Russia's behavior, possibly some sanctions relief or the return of Russian diplomatic properties in the U.S. seized at the end of the Obama administration. Russia has repeatedly threatened retaliation if those aren't returned. But in the meantime, today, Putin met with Chinese President Xi and talked up the two of them working together on the North Korean threat, calling for dialogue and a change in U.S. behavior on the issue. This as skeptical European allies and others, stunned over some of Trump's statements and moves, including the U.S.'s pullout from the Paris climate deal, increasingly speak of America as turning inward, the need for others to take the lead.
That report from CNN's Michelle Kosinski in Washington. Liquor stores, fast food chains and fried chicken takeaways are a common sight on the streets of South Auckland where communities are fighting to get healthy. In Mangere, a suburb with a large Pacifica community, locals have some of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes in the country. As part of RNZ Is This the Brighter Future series, an assessment of the National-led government's record, RNZ Pacific's Indira Stewart looks at how the community is trying to improve its health, one dance step at a time.
If you happen to be in Mangere Town Centre at 12 o'clock, you'll notice that everything in the shopping centre stops as soon as the DJ drops a track. It's the town's open Zumba class where around 100 people have been joining in every day for the last 5 years. When Isitolo Lemoy first showed up to this class 3 years ago, he was wheelchair-bound.
At that time, I have no hope to walk again. And I came here and exercise. That time, if I lift up my hands, I cannot straight like this. It's down like this. And I think this the Zumba is good for me.
After multiple knee operations, doctors told him he'd still have trouble walking without regular exercise. He says the Zumba class has turned his life around.
They really helped me to walk again. So that's why I love this group. I got this group as my family.
While many locals are hoping to get fit and lose weight, in this town it's a battle against the odds. Right next door is a fast food takeaway shop, a bakery and a couple of liquor stores. Outside the town centre you'll see a McDonald's, a KFC and a Carl's Jr. just across the road. Zumba participant Pepe Tufunga Pati says eating healthily here is a challenge for many.
I always go and cheer them up. That's the message to them. Come and do something for yourself. Not just only come and stand in front of all those shops, eat chicken and chips. Stop eating takeaway. I'm honest. Like the one next to me, she's diabetic, but she likes eating takeaway. So she said to me, good idea, sis. I'm so happy of you.
With the largest Pacific population in New Zealand residing right here in the Mangere Otahuhu local board area, the suburb struggles provide a window on Pasifika health challenges nationwide. Despite various government initiatives over the last decade, the number of obese Pacific adults has risen to nearly 70%, double the rate of the general population. A report looking into Pasifika health after the last census in 2013 indicated the government's response to the health needs of Pacific peoples has been inadequate. Zumba instructor Pila Tomo is driven to change the situation in his community.
I like the people to come to see the life and all day to exercise. I see him is, I like that to help the people. You know, see the fat is going. Now I see maybe it's 1 month, 2 months, the kilo is coming down.
1 in 10 Pacific adults has been diagnosed with diabetes, more than 3 times the rate of non-Pacific adults, a level that hasn't budged over the last decade. Kalolaine Kaufusi, who organises the Zumba class, also runs a monthly nutrition and cooking class in the town centre aimed at tackling obesity and diabetes in the community.
So how do I cook the corned beef? I'll just boil the corned beef and drain the fat and then cook it with the vegetable or the cabbage or spinach or something like that. So you don't need any fat in there.
But her healthier style of cooking hasn't always gone down well with locals.
They told me, you just take away the flavor. And I said, yeah, it's good because we can taste the fat. It's nice and salty, but end up when you finish eating, you just sit around, watch TV, and do nothing. This is how the fat and the starch grow, and this is how you get diabetes.
A local medical clinic, Beta Drive Healthcare, says that on top of battling obesity and diabetes, many patients can't afford to see a doctor and often don't have transport to get to the clinic in the first place. Socio-economic factors are a big contributor to poor health, with Mangere ranking in the highest deprivation bracket in the country. But that's not stopping the locals. Despite having had no council or government funding, Ms. Gallo and her family think the volunteer-run Zumba and nutrition classes are making a tangible difference to the community.
We just sacrifice our family, our needs to come and do this job for the people. And I know the heaps of them, it's important in their life. So our blessing is coming from God.
Mo te hōtaka o te ahi-ahi, ko Indira Stewart aho.
What a wonderful story, Indira. Thank you very much. Lots of feedback coming in about coastal erosion and homes that are at real risk of simply being washed away, whether erosion from above or from the sea. Don't compensate owners. This is the thin end of a massive wedge. Coastal residents have known for decades that erosion risks exist. Buyer beware, says one person. Pim, local councils do not underwrite risks taken by private individuals. Why should a precedent be set of council rates made up of people's hard-earned money being used to underwrite the losses of private developers? Lots of you saying stuff like that. Thank you. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Homeowners in Matata's flood zone say they've been threatened by the Whakatane Council to accept buyout offers or they will be kicked out. Some 34 properties in the small Bay of Plenty town have been deemed at risk of loss of life from flooding and debris flows. Owners of the properties, which were badly damaged in flooding in May 2005, say the District Council went back on promises to mitigate risks. Wayne Irwin told Checkpoint he'd been offered half what his home was worth.
We're now being told that if we don't take the voluntary retreat plan that they're offering, they're going to take it to a higher level and have us where they could have us forced off our land with no compensation.
Homeowner Wayne Irwin. Council documents show the council believes it has no legal obligation to compensate landowners for loss of property values. Senior doctors say some intellectually disabled children and adults are at imminent risk of harm because secure care units are critically under-resourced. The doctors have written to the Health Ministry saying resourcing in the sector is inadequate and demanding an independent review. RNZ News has obtained a copy of a letter from the Human Rights Commissioner and the Children's Commissioner to the Ministry last month. In it, David Rutherford and Andrew Beecroft back psychiatrists' worries about critical under-resourcing in intellectual disability secure care. They say a review of intellectual disability is needed. Team New Zealand trimmer Blair Tuke says it's a special feeling being able to bring the America's Cup home. A big crowd was at the arrivals gate to greet the team members at Auckland Airport. Tuke says a huge number of people have contributed to the team's success, putting in many hours of work over the years, including designers and boat builders. He says it was awesome being able to sail well and beat Oracle.
Yeah, as a kid you grow up and you watch it 95, 2000 and it means so much to Kiwis, so for us to now be bringing it back is really, really special.
Sailor Blair Tuke. Wellingtonians will be able to see the America's Cup and the victorious Team New Zealand during a parade through the capital next Tuesday. Members of the Hato Petera college community are angry. The Catholic Diocese of Auckland has allowed the school's boarding hostel to be occupied by the homeless. The church closed the hostel to students last year, and the Catholic Māori High School is still fighting to get its boarding facility back. Housing and family support provider DePaul House has signed a 2-year lease with the Catholic Church to house the homeless at the boarding facility. But a former member of the Te Whānau o Hato Petera Trust, Shannon Halbert, says the diocese has obligations under an existing lease with the school.
This is about a greedy landlord, that is the bishop, has got a better financial offer from DePaul House. And now there's a second lease on the same facilities. Now, I'm not sure how you have two leases all at once, but they're using two groups of vulnerable people and creating conflict amongst both of them.
Former Trust member Shannon Halbert. Meanwhile, MPs on a parliamentary committee have been told vulnerable people are living in squalor in overcrowded boarding houses, even paying as much as $300 a week to stay in a converted garage. The Minister responsible for drug reform, Peter Dunn, will give his initial support to a member's bill legalising medicinal cannabis. He was asked about it during a political panel at a drug symposium in Parliament today. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Just last month, Peter Dunn criticised Green MP Julianne Genter's bill, saying it was unworkable and changed the whole ballgame in an unintended way. But today he says he will vote for the bill in the first reading, as it's worth trying to sort out some of the issues, such as the scope of the bill and how it will work practically. The bill would make it legal for people suffering from a terminal illness or debilitating condition to use cannabis or cannabis products with the support of a GP. On the political panel today, MPs from the ACT, Green, Māori and Labour parties said they would all support the bill. But National MP Chris Bishop says his party hasn't decided whether it will treat it as a conscience vote or vote together as a party. From Parliament, May Heron.
Many South Islanders are being warned to prepare for the coldest night of the year. The Transport Agency's John Jarvis says people in Otago, Southland and parts of Canterbury should take care as a frosty night ahead will cause icy roads. Met Service says Invercargill is facing a low of -4 degrees overnight, while Wanaka can anticipate -3 degrees. Mr Jarvis says many roads will be gritted, but black ice is likely to form in remote places, such as shady areas and bridges, and people should start work later tomorrow if possible. He says drivers should carry chains in alpine areas or where snow is expected. It's 6:05. The British and Irish Lions are 80 minutes from immortality when they play the All Blacks in Saturday's deciding test in Auckland, says hooker Jamie George. Victory in Auckland would give the Lions just their second series win over New Zealand, who haven't lost at Eden Park since 1994. The Lions' only series win in New Zealand came in 1971, and the second test loss in Wellington was the All Blacks' first defeat there in 7 years, while they haven't lost successive test matches since 2011. But George says they can't afford to get ahead of themselves.
We need to be able to take ourselves to a place that we've never been before, mentally and physically, and we can't get carried away with the emotional side of the game. We've got to make sure that physically we're on it, mentally we're on it, we know our stuff, because I think sometimes you can maybe get overawed by the whole occasion and think about making history and all the rest of it.
Jamie George. The French Open doubles champion New Zealander Michael Venus begins his Wimbledon campaign tonight alongside American partner Ryan Harrison. The pair are seeded 10th. Fellow New Zealander Artem Sitak and his American partner Nicholas Munro are also playing their first round tonight. The Breakers will get to play 3 of their first 4 games of the ANBL basketball season at home in Auckland. They'll also play 10 games at the downtown Spark Arena and 4 games at the North Shore Event Centre. The opening match of the season will be against the Cairns Taipans on October the 8th. And that's the news.
Southern New Zealand bears the brunt of excessive petrol prices.
Oh, it should be more expensive up north than here. We don't need that infrastructure what they're building in Auckland.
Protecting whistleblowers.
The Act is meant to give people a protected, safe, encouraging atmosphere and context to make complaints of wrongdoing, and it doesn't do it.
Tsunami terror in suburban Wellington.
I was quite concerned to see people running down the street outside my house wearing dressing gowns and wielding torches and looking panicked, and I was panicking too.
Fueling debates and making waves. Morning reports weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, why the boys will be boys notion is dangerous. And after 10, Leo Holding, who has forged a career in extreme climbing with expeditions to some of the most remote and challenging climbs on Earth. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo and Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to occasional rain in the morning with some heavy and possibly thundery falls for Northland, Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula. For Taranaki, the Central High Country and Gisborne. Fine today, scattered rain developing tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti, also Hawke's Bay, mainly fine with frosts tomorrow morning. A few spots of rain tomorrow night. Wairarapa and Wellington fine, apart from isolated coastal showers tonight and tomorrow morning. Showers spreading to the remainder of the Wairarapa later tomorrow. For Marlborough to Otago, fine with morning frosts, possibly severe in sheltered places. However, isolated coastal showers mainly about Banks Peninsula, spreading further inland later tomorrow. The remainder of the South Island, fine weather. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms easing tomorrow. RNZ National. You're listening to Checkpoint. It's 6:08.
Thank you very much
John Campbell.
indeed, Anna Thomas. I appreciate it. We're going to go to the Persian Gulf in a short while. But first, the America's Cup was sparkling and the fans were cheering. As the old mug and the team who won it arrived back on New Zealand soil today, several hundred supporters and lots of family members gathered at Auckland Airport to welcome Team New Zealand home ahead of a victory parade through the city of Sales tomorrow. Among them were our reporter Sarah Robson and camerawoman Claire Eastham Farrelly.
Please welcome home the holders of the America's Cup, Emirates Team New Zealand!
Hundreds of fans and supporters were there to welcome Team New Zealand as they walked through the arrivals gate at Auckland Airport with their special cargo in tow. Some of those waiting had flags and signs, others came decked out in their Team New Zealand gear. But it was an extra special moment for some of the friends and family of the crew.
There'll be some celebrating to do to start with, but I think for Josh personally, he always likes to come home and check in with the local yacht club and check in with the neighbours and family and friends and have some downtime, but that might be a week or so away.
Can you just describe for people who might not be watching this, what you've come decked out in?
A tribute to all the ginger sailors around the world, yeah. One of our best mates, Jack Taylor's with Team New Zealand, and just supporting what he's been up to. Been working countless hours for a long time. Everyone kind of thinks we're probably Peter Burling, but yeah, Jack's the real hero of Team New Zealand.
Still pinching ourselves that it's happened, and I think once they're home it'll sink in for them as well when they see all this.
Team New Zealand trimmer Blair Chuk says it's pretty special to be able to bring the old mug back home.
The America's Cup is something that, as a kid you grow up and you watch it 95, 2000, and it means so much to Kiwis. So for us to now be bringing it back is really, really special, and it's just so cool. So many people put so much into this team over the years. You just have to see the hours that everyone worked in all departments, from the design guys to the boat builders and everything. And for us to be able to bring it home, sail well out there and beat Oracle is awesome.
Blair Chuk was just 6 years old when New Zealand first won the Cup back in 1995. The Olympian hadn't even started sailing when Team New Zealand successfully defended it in 2000. But winning the America's Cup is something he's had his eyes on.
As I got more and more into sailing, certainly this became a big goal of mine, and to be able to join this team, it's an amazing group of people, and to be able to sail on the boat and sail the boat well is very cool.
Blair Chuk and Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling together won gold in Rio last year in the 49er class. But Burling says it's difficult trying to compare winning an Olympic gold with the America's Cup.
I think they're just completely different. Here we're a massive team. There's over 100 people in it, and it's just incredibly special to be sharing this moment with everyone.
Skipper Glenn Ashby says there's a big crew behind the scenes that has contributed to Team New Zealand's success.
What you see on the water is just probably 1% of the work that goes on behind the scenes to actually get the boat on the water, and design, build, engineer. We've got so much support back here in New Zealand. Really, the whole New Zealand marine industry, has got behind us in some shape or form, and it's just fantastic for all those collective efforts, not only us in the team to sort of put all the tiny bits and pieces together and sail the boat, but for everybody to be able to come together. It's really everybody's cup. Everyone's had a hand in winning this thing, so that's such a pleasing feeling for me.
And Glenn Ashby says on a shoestring budget, there's a lot of Kiwi ingenuity involved too.
We have to outthink, not outspend our opponents, and in this case we absolutely outthought our opponents, and to me personally that's just such a special feeling.
While there's plenty of celebrating to do, after months in Bermuda, the team will also have to acclimatise to a New Zealand winter. You're in your jandals?
Yeah, well you come from 50-degree heat in Dubai, you don't really pack your bag quite right there. At least I got a jersey, I'm happy. Bermuda was pretty nice. Got to switch into my bag, so I'll be chucking it straight on, I think.
Tomorrow there will be a victory parade through central Auckland, followed by a sail past in the Viaduct Basin. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
13 minutes past 6. A couple who survived a horrific collision with an American tourist in Waikato have added their voice to calls for compulsory driving tests and better driver education for tourists. Teresa and Gary O'Donnell say they're angry at the punishment the 23-year-old man received for hitting their car head-on after driving on the wrong side of the road. The man was disqualified for driving for 8 months in order to pay $5,000 in reparation after pleading guilty to a charge of careless or inconsiderate vehicle operation causing injury. Joe O'Brien reports.
Teresa O'Donnell says they were driving into Matata 3 weeks ago when a car drove towards them on the same side of the road.
Obviously I feared for my life. I just thought I was going to die. Very, very quick thinking time. I turned the car onto the grass verge to my left-hand side, and the tourist guy that was heading towards me in my lane, he was following me. So he just hit me head on.
Teresa says the impact of the crash has been physically and emotionally traumatic.
Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I didn't know whether we were going to survive, to be perfectly honest with you, and we've been left with significant injuries.
Those injuries include a compound fracture to Teresa's left knee, which has put her in a cast for 3 months, while her husband Gary fractured his pelvis, wrist and right rib and broke his toe. They say the $5,000 reparation order and 8-month driving disqualification handed down to the American tourist is disappointing.
I feel very angry about it, very let down. It was never about the money to us, but it was about, we felt that the punishment that he'd received wasn't good enough.
Teresa is now calling for overseas visitors to sit driving tests and be better educated about New Zealand roads and driving conditions. The British-born New Zealand citizen says the problem of foreign drivers seems to be getting worse.
Just about every day you read in the news that something's happened. You know, I've seen it even around the Waikato, there's tourists and they've got these little GoPros in the cars, and I've watched them and they're not even looking where they're going.
A petition calling for foreign drivers staying longer than 3 months to sit a full driving licence test was presented to Parliament in February. But the AA's Simon Douglas says having a driving test for vast numbers of visitors is not practical.
We get something like 3.5 million visitors arriving every year. At least 60% of those drive, and that is vastly more driving tests than we could hope to roll out at the border.
And the Transport Agency's Jim Harland, who's chairing a project to improve the safety of visiting drivers, says they're already working to educate tourists.
A significant education campaign, which does have billboards around the theme of New Zealand roads are different, keep left, allow extra time. There's also, when you arrive to pick up a rental car or you're at your accommodation establishment, they both have codes of conduct for their members to ask you questions and give you advice around New Zealand driving behaviour and expectations.
The Visiting Drivers Project also involves improvements to roading infrastructure, such as directional arrows, rumble strips and lay-bys, which have predominantly been rolled out in tourist hotspots in the South Island. Simon Douglas says the AA wants the project rolled out to other key tourist routes around the country.
The sorts of infrastructure programs that they're rolling out in those areas, the AA thinks are desperately needed in some other areas in New Zealand where we get very high concentrations of visitor drivers.
Matamata Piako Mayor Jan Barnes says tourist numbers in her district have ramped up with the arrival of Hobbiton, but she says a lot of work has gone into making the roads safe for them and locals.
I know that there's been a huge amount of effort and dollars going in on roading particularly and signage. And I know that our staff, NZTA, Hobbiton, we have been trying to work on different areas to make our roads as safe as we can.
The Transport Agency believes the Visiting Drivers Project is making progress because it says the number of crashes involving visitors has remained steady despite visitor numbers increasing in the last few years. But that's cold comfort for Teresa and Gary O'Donnell, who remain in hospital in Matamata recovering from their injuries. For Checkpoint, ko Joe O'Brien tēnei.
80 minutes past 6. Members of the Hato Petera college community are angry that the Catholic Diocese of Auckland has allowed their boarding hostel to be occupied by the homeless. The church closed the hostel to students last year and the Catholic Māori High School is still fighting to get its boarding facility back. Te Mano Korehi reporter Te Aniwa Hurihanganui has more.
Housing and family support provider DePaul House has signed a 2-year lease with the Catholic Church to accommodate the homeless. But there are currently 30 tertiary students from the Auckland University of Technology using the hostel in Northcote. The chair of Te Whānau Hato Petera Trust, Rudy Taylor, says these students are being evicted, just like the Hato Petera college students were last year. He says they have had no choice but to file an injunction to stop the church.
And this is what you call the modern-day land grab. The church does not support the future of Hato Petera, despite parents and community supporting it to stay open. They've taken that on board to say we don't need a church, need a education anymore. And I think it's time for us to really sit down and talk. Otherwise, let's go to court and argue those issues.
Puti May Louise Isaacs is a Year 13 student at Hato Petera. The former boarder thinks the church has given up on the school, which is struggling to retain staff as its role plummets.
They said that it wasn't a livable area, but they have homeless kids living in there, so yeah, I don't understand that. They're just basically trying to shut the school down. That's how it feels for us.
376 acres was granted to the Catholic Church in Auckland's North Shore in 1850, with the purpose of supporting Māori education on the site and later the maintenance of Hato Petera. A former member of Te Whānau Hato Petera Trust, Shannon Halbert, says the diocese has obligations under an existing lease with the school.
This is about a greedy landlord, that is the bishop, has got a better financial offer from the Paul House. And now there's a second lease on the same facilities. Now, I'm not sure how you have two leases all at once, but they're using two groups of vulnerable people and creating conflict amongst both of them.
Mr Halbert says the church does not support a future for Hato Petera College, despite the community fighting for it to remain open. He says there are ways the church could resolve these issues.
The church needs to come clean about what their intentions are. Well, we know that in 2 years' time the housing crisis isn't going to be over. There's plenty of land that could accommodate both the Paul House and the need of the school to operate.
The Catholic Diocese of Auckland, which declined to be interviewed by RNZ News, says it was always a temporary agreement to accommodate students from AUT. And it says no decision has been made on the hostel's future. De Paul House confirmed the hostel would be used to house the homeless, but referred RNZ News back to the Catholic Diocese for further comment. For Checkpoint, ko te aniwa hurihanga nui tēnei.
It's 21 minutes past 6. We head now to the Persian Gulf, where the standoff between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, backed by allies including Egypt, is becoming more tense and more intractable. The four Arab nations say they've received Qatar's response to their demands for ending the diplomatic crisis gripping the Persian Gulf just before a planned meeting in Cairo. Qatar has called the demands, which include shutting down its Al Jazeera news network, expelling Turkish military forces based in the country, and paying restitution as an affront to its sovereignty. The kind of win-win required for both Qatar and Saudi Arabia to walk away with their pride intact looks almost unachievable. It defies obvious resolution and even, to a certain extent, ordinary understanding. Andy Critchlow is Middle East editor for Reuters. He has a master's in Middle East politics, and even for a man who's lived in the region, worked in the region and studied the region, this current situation is extraordinary.
In my experience of the Gulf, and as you said, I've been travelling to the region, since 2000. Lived there for over a decade, reported there for 16, 17 years. I've never seen anything like this. The Arab states of the Gulf, these six sheikdoms, which comprise what's called the Gulf Cooperation Council, that's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, and Kuwait, and Bahrain. They're tied together by religion. They're predominantly Sunni Muslim countries, and they're also tied together by bonds of family, and not just amongst their royal households, the monarchies that rule these countries, but throughout society. So there's very deep cultural ties that bind all these countries together, which makes the current dispute between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE predominantly all the more remarkable. And if you were to have said to me at the beginning of this year that we will be in a situation where Qatar was subject to a blockade by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that Qataris had essentially been ejected from these countries, that they couldn't travel to these countries, that you couldn't fly into Qatar from these countries, that they had been given a list of 13 demands, and if they don't comply to these demands, they could face tougher sanctions or even, God forbid, military action, I would have said not a chance.
So, Andy, how can this possibly be resolved? What can Qatar do to both respond to these demands and also not lose face internally? It seems to me a precarious balancing act. Can Qatar achieve it? Do they want to achieve it?
Well, the Qataris have definitely circled the wagons and the conversations that I've had with quite senior Qataris about this, they are defiant. They see this as an assault on their sovereignty. Although they're defiant and they want to protect their sovereignty, and they certainly don't want to be seen to give in here, ideally they would prefer a compromise. From the Saudi and the UAE position, I feel there is no compromise. And this is partly driven by what's happening internally in these countries. So in Saudi Arabia, you've essentially had, beneath the king, you've essentially had a coup over the last 2 weeks where the Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, the king's son, essentially deposed his cousin, Mohammed bin Naif, who was the Crown Prince, and he was relieved of all his duties as Crown Prince. And Mohammed bin Salman is a very dynamic young figure, very aggressive. He's taken Saudi Arabia into wars in Yemen. He's taken Saudi Arabia into a huge economic reform plan. He's going to IPO their national oil company, Saudi Aramco, hopefully raise up to $2 trillion for a huge sovereign wealth fund. He's revolutionizing the country. And, some could say that he is using this dispute with Qatar to show that he is the strong leader in the Gulf. And if that's the case, then it's very unlikely he would back down.
So there are clearly complicating factors over and above the tension between nations. There's alpha male posturing, there are internal machinations which are complex in their own right, all of which makes it harder, doesn't it, to see some kind of easy resolution here. And I wonder, is conflict becoming possible?
I don't think that can be ruled out. And certainly at various periods over the last 30 years, Saudi Arabia and Qatar in the past, have almost come to blows. Of course, Saudi Arabia is one of the world's top three procurers of defence equipment. It has a large military, the biggest military on that side of the Gulf. It is in their power to escalate this to a military level, absolutely. What could stop that? Well, the US has its CENTCOM base, its Central Command facility for the region based in Qatar. That would obviously pose something of a problem for Saudi if they did want to escalate this on a military level. Would the Americans want to be caught in the middle? I doubt it, because they're very closely allied to the Saudis anyway. The reality is that if it did get to that, the Qataris wouldn't stand a chance. And who would actually come to their aid? Could they call on the Russians? Could they rely on support from Turkey if that came to pass?
Gosh, it's fascinating, isn't it? That's Andy Critchlow, who's Middle East editor for Reuters and whose dad is a New Zealander. Coincidentally, members of British Special Forces and the SAS are facing claims they killed unarmed Afghan civilians and then tried to cover up the evidence. Senior politicians, including Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, are calling for an independent inquiry. This report from the BBC.
The Royal Military Police have been investigating allegations of abuses by British forces in Afghanistan in what's known as Operation Northmoor. The most sensitive of these are the allegations that British forces deliberately killed unarmed Afghan civilians. I was in Afghanistan recently investigating this, and I spoke to one young Afghan man from the Helmand province who claims that back in 2011, 4 members of his family were killed in a night raid carried out by its believed British Special Forces.
It was 1 a.m. 2 helicopters came and landed nearby and called for us to come out of our rooms, that they were here to search the house. They separated me from my father and closed my eyes and asked me to sit down. We were in that room for the rest of the night. When the helicopters left the area, we came out of the room. I saw that they had martyred my father, 2 brothers and cousin.
Now, these are, of course, at this stage just allegations, But we know they're being taken seriously enough by the Royal Military Police that they've been making arrangements to go out to Afghanistan and interview this man. I've also spoken to a number of other people from the area where this happened, and they also claim that the family members were definitely not members of any insurgent group. The BBC has also spoken to a former British Army intelligence officer who served in Afghanistan, Chris Green, and he says he believes there wasn't enough transparency from Special Forces when he tried to look into allegations of abuses by them.
British forces, the ground holding troops that I worked with, worked under a very, very strict rules of engagement. And it seemed to me that Special Forces did not have to apply the same rules in quite the same way. When I sought information from them, this wall of secrecy was put in front of me.
A Ministry of Defence spokesman said in relation to Operation Northmoor that the Royal Military Police has found no evidence of criminal behaviour by the armed forces in Afghanistan, and less than 10 investigations remain. The statement continues, "Our military served with great courage and professionalism, and we proudly hold them to the highest standards. Where allegations are raised, it's right that they are investigated."
That report from the BBC bringing Checkpoint to an end for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Homeowners in Matata's flood zone say the Whakatane Council has told them to accept low buyout offers or leave. There's been a call for the government to address a critical shortage of resources in intellectual disability secure care. Team New Zealand coach Grant Dalton says one syndicate has approached the team for talent in the next America's Cup race. He says there's a target for more challenges at the next Cup in New Zealand. Fiji's Prime Minister has pleaded with Australia and New Zealand to work with Pacific nations in persuading the world to tackle the causes of climate change. The coldest night of the year is coming up in the deep south, and residents in the Wellington suburb of Mount Victoria may run into soldiers tonight. They're testing night vision equipment in the town belt. Our next news and weather at 7.
He knows at the end of the day how I feel about him. My love for him is unconditional.